Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be talking about some basic tips and tricks for Magic the Gathering, the Midnight Hunt expansion set. This deck is going to be a red and green werewolf deck. Here's how the day-night mechanic works. When something enters play that's day-bound, for instance, it's going to start tracking whether it's day or night in the game. Until this happens, you don't have to worry about it. But once something with this keyword pops into play, then you have to start tracking it. So now we're going to use this reference card, and you can find these in the booster packs. They were just randomly inserted where the tokens usually are. So what it says is that as it becomes day, transform all nightbound permanents. So think of it as anything that's daybound is going to be on their day side. Anything that would be nightbound, if it becomes day, would flip and turn back into a human. So your werewolves are going to be human during the daytime and werewolves at night, which kind of makes sense. Now what you have to worry about is you're going to try with this deck to convert it to nighttime as much as possible, because that's when you're the most powerful. So as an example, if you don't play a spell on your turn, it will become night the next turn. So this is pretty cool, and what it's going to do is, let's say you don't cast any spells on your turn, then it's going to flip to night, and then your beasts are going to transform. Now when this occurs, a lot of the creatures are going to be super powerful at night, and there's other effects in the game too for the other colors that day or night really is dependent upon what happens. Now your opponent's turn, they're going to try everything in their power to turn it back to daytime, and they can do that by just simply casting at least 2 spells on their turn, and then it will flip over to daytime. Now casting 2 spells on your turn can be a really difficult thing, especially at the beginning of the game where you don't have much mana, and let's say you have some more expensive cards in your deck, you won't be able to flip it back over. So by playing a werewolf deck, you have an advantage of staying in the night phase, and if you can do that, then you're going to have a really easy time dispatching your opponent. I'm going to start out with a combo for this deck that happened a lot, and it's really easy to do. It's super crazy, it's super powerful and obnoxious, and it gives you a massive advantage. The first is that if you have multiple copies of this Kessig Naturalist, I would suggest playing it. In this case, I have 3 of them in the deck, and they are uncommon. Now, what's great about this card is that it costs 1 green and 1 red, so you can play it potentially on turn 2 if you're lucky to have enough, 1 mountain and 1 forest. So when you go ahead and put this thing out, it is going to be daybound, so that's going to trigger this daylight effect card, and you're going to have this nice naturalist in play. So from that point forward, you're going to start tracking how much, the difference between day and night. So it's going to start off as daytime. Now on your 3rd turn, and this happened all the time, and I was able to replicate this in multiple games, you have these things in your deck called the Bounding Wolf, and these things are super cool. Notice that it has the flash ability, which means that you can play it on an opponent's turn. It also has reach, and it's a 3/2. So what you're going to do is you're going to keep this naturalist out on turn 2. On your 3rd turn, you're going to have the mana in your hand to be able to cast the Bounding Wolf, but you're not going to cast it on your turn. What you're going to do is cast absolutely no spells on your turn, and what this is going to do is it's going to flip it from day to night. Okay? And then once it flips to night, this naturalist is going to flip over, and it's going to become its werewolf form. And notice too that it says other wolves and werewolves you control get a +1/+1. So now it's going to be your opponent's turn. You've got this gnarly looking werewolf out on the table that's a 3/3. And at the end of their turn, what you're going to do is you're going to play the Bounding Wolf as a flash effect. So in essence what you're doing is you took the mana from your turn, you passed, and gave it over to your opponent's turn, but your main intent was to cast the Bounding Wolf onto the table. So you still get to use your mana, but now you just do it as a flash reaction. So you flopped it from day to night, and now the Bounding Wolf comes into play. What's great about this is that now that you're werewolf, the Lord of the Ulvenwald, I don't even know how to pronounce that. The other wolves and werewolves you control get a +1/+1. So now when you start your 4th turn, you're going to have a 3/3 werewolf on the table, and you're going to have a 4/3 bounding wolf on the table. And this combo is going to be super potent and powerful because on turn 4 you're going to have 2 heavy hitting creatures, and this works effectively. Now, what else you can do is on your 4th turn, you're probably going to have a 4th land if you're lucky enough to do so. And if this thing is attacking, it's going to give you some bonus mana as well. So now you can bring out something even bigger. And so maybe, let's say, for instance, we can bring out the Tavern Ruffian. But since it's nighttime, it's going to pop onto the table in werewolf form. And it's going to be ridiculously big. So this is a 6/5. Plus it's going to get a +1/+1 bonus. Now you've got a 7/6. If your opponent doesn't disrupt this immediately, the game is pretty much over. If you're new to Magic the Gathering, here's something that I would encourage you to try at least once. Build a deck that only has creatures in it and use it against your opponent. What you're going to see is that oftentimes by having just creatures in your deck, you can do some crazy things and you can overwhelm your opponent's defenses. And I don't recommend necessarily doing this all the time, but at least try it out a few times. I have had numerous gaming sessions where this occurs, where a player will show up literally with a deck with only creatures, and it usually sparks a bunch of controversy, and it usually leads to some really strange and interesting matches. Oftentimes, your mid-level to high-level experienced players sometimes get surprised by it, and they can get overrun and overwhelmed. Now, you can do it with red and green. So if you would like to do that, you can remove a lot of these instants and sorceries from the deck and just throw in extra werewolf-style creatures and fill up the deck with those, like wolves and werewolves is what I recommend. Now, if you're not going to go that route, I did put several copies of each of these cards into the deck. I think they're kind of fun, but they're definitely not needed. This werewolf deck is pretty quick to start up and can overwhelm your opponent's defenses pretty handily. The first one is the Moonrager's Slash. It's a 3 casting cost instant. Now it's going to hit for 3 damage, but if it's nighttime, it only costs 1 red mana, which is fantastic. This is almost reminiscent of the original Lightning Bolt from the original Magic the Gathering set, except it needs to be nighttime to do it. Clear Shot. This card is super cool, super obnoxious, and you can surprise your opponents with it. Target creature you control gets a +1/+1 until the end of the turn, and it deals damage equal to its power to a target creature you don't control. This can seriously mess up a battle and cause it to go really poorly for your opponent. It's a great surprise and can cause a lot of havoc, and for 3 mana, it's a great surprise. On the far end of the table is Pax Betrayal. You can use this to basically possess an enemy creature, and you can use it to just attack the opponent. So what's kind of cool about it is that if your opponent has something super big and it's kind of been annoying you, you can grab it for a turn and then use it to attack them, and that can create some havoc as well. So try these 3 cards out. I think they worked very well in the werewolf/wolf deck. To round this out, I'm going to quickly go through the remainder of this deck. It's going to contain a bunch of these transforming humans that go into werewolves. The first is going to be the Hound Tamer. It's going to have a 3/3 trample ability, but you can also buff up and put counters on the target creature. Usually the game, I found, doesn't last long enough to really use this effect. I think I only used it once or twice, but you can do that. Next up, we're going to have this Infiltrator. It also has trample and can convert, so you've got a couple cards with trample that we've just seen. Next, in mana cost, we've got the Brigand. And this thing's pretty cool. You can give it first strike, which is always a good way to mess up your opponent in the battles that you're fighting. Next we have the Tireless Hauler with Vigilance, and it's pretty big. So a 4/5 Vigilance card, it doesn't tap to attack. That's going to be super cool, and it's going to help you defend. Now remember, we also have those creatures with reach, so you have a pretty heavy and hefty defensive capability. if you need to employ that. But typically, I think you can just overwhelm and overrun your enemies with just quick attacks. Next up, we have the Village Watch, and this thing is super crazy and powerful. So that combo I kind of started off with the beginning of the video with the Naturalist and the Bounding Wolf. This thing only costs 5 mana to bring out, so you could potentially do that pretty early on in the game, especially with the Naturalist giving you those extra resources. So be aware too that this thing has haste, so when it's flipped over in werewolf form, it's like a 5/4 creature with haste, and then it also gives every single wolf and werewolf haste as well. So once this thing's on the table, you can just start popping all your werewolves, and this gets really bad really fast because any werewolf comes into play in the nighttime phase will have haste, which is super crazy. And then finally, I only had one copy of this rare werewolf, sort of hybrid, but this thing's pretty cool, so I went ahead and just threw it into the deck. And things can get pretty crazy when you use this thing. It's not essential that you have this legendary creature, but since I had it, I threw it in because it was fun and it definitely fit the theme of the deck. To summarize, I felt that red-green werewolf decks from Midnight Hunt are extremely effective and a lot of fun to play. So just as a kind of quick summary, we're going to understand that the day-night mechanic is going to be very important to this deck. You want to keep this card in the nighttime phase as much as possible and keep your cards in werewolf form. And this will enhance your ability to rapidly destroy your opponent. There were many of these games. The games don't last very long if you get the right card mix and combos, and if your opponent has a little bit of a slow startup, this could be really devastating and damaging. So just keep that in mind when you play it. Other things that you will focus on is that you have the great ability to mitigate flyers. You have the great ability to, soak up a decent amount of attacks because a lot of these werewolves are pretty large. Even when they're in human form, they have a pretty decent toughness. So you don't really have to worry about a lot of these battles going illy for you. Just remember, too, that you also have a large arsenal of cards that you can use if the game starts getting out of hand, whether it's using Clear Shot or this Slash ability or the Betrayal ability as well. You can neutralize a lot of those enemy creatures and really shift the balance of the game towards you and your werewolf faction. I want to thank everybody for joining me again today for this Magic the Gathering Midnight Hunt video. Please, if you enjoy this content, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I'm constantly trying to add new videos to just help new players to different games understand the mechanics a little bit better and make cool and exciting decks. Hopefully this deck building video has given you some tips and tricks, and you can start creating your own amazing Magic the Gathering decks. Thanks again, and as always, have fun gaming.